Last night, listening to the Dan York show in the first hour at 3 o'clock, right after the show ended, two guests were on with Dan, Mike Collins, who is a well-known guy since his epic testimony in front of the House, in front of the Senate, on the specific issue of roadworks. Back in the day, he's now also a leading force in the Gatsby Business Network, as well as a trucker. And Chris Maxwell, who is the boss over at the Rhode Island Trucking Association. He's the president and CEO, and he's in the studio with me today. Chris, I heard you guys calling the Dan show yesterday.
Yes.
And you guys had an interesting call to the governor and basically said if it's that bad, why are we still allowing trucks to drive over this whole span and this network of bridges, right?
Correct. That is correct. When I heard that there was going to be a news conference at noon on roadworks, I think the joke was, oh boy, maybe there's something good. Maybe they're.
Because you guys just give context. You guys have no relationship with that office.
Nothing.
You told me this a couple of weeks ago. You guys have no relationship with any member of the General Assembly anymore. It really is. It's kind of
nothing.
You're on the other side of the table looking at each other. There's no communication. You're not brought in. You were never brought in to begin with.
We were never brought in to begin with. We were never brought in throughout the process. We were never acknowledged in any way throughout the debate. We were not acknowledged after what I'll give Mr. Alvidia credit. We still maintain what I believe is a cordial relationship. He shook my hand the night of the vote and said, "You're a worthy opponent," and I concurred with him on that. And yet the governor has a whole sector, vital business sector, that she has turned her back on and continues to do so, up to and including right now as we sit here, when an industry asks a legitimate safety question to the commander-in-chief of the state, a state governor, a legitimate question about the safety of the highway, given the critical nature of a press conference, and almost 24 hours later there is no response to a legitimate question. You call the press conference with your leadership saying time is of the essence, we're running out of time, safety is an issue, we need to get this thing on the fast track, we need to accelerate the design, the construction, we need to abbreviate the public comment. The first thing that I thought of when I heard this was, where are the restrictions? There need to be restrictions. It's not a vital link that would cause some heartburn for our industry if we have to go around the 610. But my first question was, why didn't they lead with, we need to close or restrict the weights on the 610 because this is what's happening, and it really caused us to have concern. So here we are 24 hours later with the same that we've had for the last 14 months. We are persona non grata with the governor. We don't matter, even at this point where it rises to a level of public safety. So if the governor's not going to acknowledge our concern and formally address them, we will run it right up the ladder to the ATA, and they will address it with Secretary Fox in Washington. This is a major link in a major city that the governor has come out and said is in deplorable condition, and we need to. This is a fire. This is yelling fire in the theater. Yet heavy trucks. We run the heaviest trucks in the country, perhaps, legally on a state-issued overweight permit. So the trucks that they're targeting going down 95 are roughly 70 feet long, maybe 60,000 pounds on a long wheelbase. The 610 is primarily run by tractor-trailer dumps, trash haulers, 10-wheel Class 6 and 7 trucks that are operating on an overweight permit, 104,000 pounds in the case of a trailer dump or a short carting truck, and 76,000 pounds on a 10-wheeler. So these are really the heaviest trucks you could possibly have. Running this 24/7, 365. So if it rises to the level of having your team there and having a press conference to say we need to move this, then the first question from our industry or any reasonable person is, why aren't you restricting us? Because we're not supposed to be the ones, trucking's not supposed to be the ones to call for restrictions. That's not what we do. It's not great for commerce. But in a case where we're willing to work with the leaders and say, look, we're gonna cooperate to get this thing done, and we're gonna cooperate to make sure nothing really bad happens, you should be doing this and not us. So here we sit now, Matt, with no answer from the governor.
Here's the interesting. So people who are just tuning in and just, what are you talking about? You're skeptical of the severity of the degradation of that bridge, and because in terms of where it was before to now, right? I mean,
I'm skeptical of the timing of that. I don't think that bridge is in any more deplorable condition than it was at the outset of roadworks. Okay, I think there's a political. There's an election coming up Tuesday. There's the coincidence of that the roadworks now and the critical need to fix bridges comes out just 5 days or so before, and it reinvigorates those elected leaders that are fighting for their lives because they voted for roadworks. Now you put it out there front and center. Remember, when roadworks came out at first, it was London Bridge is falling down. We're in a critical need from the Speaker's Bridge to others, and then it was crickets because it essentially got passed and there was no need for the fire drill. Well, now we are back. We've had a long debate. They've had a period where they were looking to do crazy things with the 610. We all know about the bus pass and the bus lanes, and I don't have to rehash that. But there was also, some don't know about, very aggressive plans for new ramps that would pass over 95 and let traffic out in the high speed lane north of the State House. Really some visionary, very expensive things. They wanted the Maserati, but recent developments were they knew they couldn't have the Maserati now because the 175 and fast lane got cut off. They were getting tremendous pushback.
What Chris is talking about, by the way, if people don't follow, is there's federal grant money that they were relying on to get that project done. $175 million come through. Right.
Went away.
Right.
So now they have that go away. They have what's going to be a war on all the non-essential ingredients of the 610. And then you have the New York decision that shines the white hot spotlight on, you better do with any money, whether it be gas tax or toll money, you better put it where it should be going. That's essential bridges and that. So, point being, that agenda just ran out. So they went from a Maserati back to a Chevrolet. So now we got the Chevrolet. It's the crown jewel of the roadworks project. I'm certain the governor is betrothed to labor, the labor's union. They had her elected. DOT is of labor, Mr. Alviti. And now this is the crown jewel. What are we waiting for? We didn't get the Maserati. We got the Ford. Let's accelerate this process. Let's use what we see as a very subjective and what we call a flawed, archaic bridge inspection process to drive our agenda and get the 610 started. Well, and that's our concern.
This is going to be interesting because I think that what you're saying and what you're alleging here is really, I think it's powerful, because if you're going to sit there and say that the people of Rhode Island are going to be manipulated or money's going to be spent, really it's a form of scare tactic. I mean, using the safety of the people to promote a political agenda, that's a hell of an accusation.
Let me say this. The system is wrong. They're being allowed to inspect bridges on a completely subjective manner. And our next guest will speak to that more in depth than I will.
I want to talk to people about that because we're going to have a guest on that Chris brought to me. You brought me.
Right,
you said
right.
You should talk to this expert because this guy has a technology, runs a company, has technology that would objectively judge bridges and inspect bridges with data rather than eyeballs.
Right. As a career construction person, I long had suspicions that the flawed agenda and program of the DOT that there was an agenda there. And years ago it was let's ignore the bridges and maybe use the inspection discretion we're granted to say that they're good enough that we don't have to touch them in favor of a more profitable, expedient surface work. Bill Ankner came in years ago, said, you guys got it all wrong. You can't pave and plant and do all these things without looking at your bridges. Now we're doing the flip-flop now. Now we're using that same flawed subjective process that they're allowed to use. They're allowed to use that process. I'm not saying it's they're using the system that they're allowed to use. It is very subjective to say now the bridges are falling down. They said it 14 months ago. Now they're using it again. They're using scare tactics, and I think the timing of this, with you look at the whole content, you said the bridges were coming down, and we asked you why you haven't posted it for trucks.
You're suspicious of this because we now have a fire being lit under everybody, fast track,
That's correct.
with no restrictions.
That's correct.
If it was that bad, you would have restrictions on there. You wouldn't allow for this to happen. But we're going to talk more.
And I may even go as far as I think maybe to put restrictions, you need more empirical evidence to show that. And I think the inspections processes that we're going to talk about are long overdue to allow, with billions of dollars in being spent on bridges,
Right.
we need to correct the system rather than allow what's going on to continue.
All right, let me take a break. We come back, and I'll talk to you a little bit more after the bottom of the hour. We're going to have is it Peter Vanderzee is his name, right?
That's correct. Yes.
He's with this Lifespan Technologies group, and they have a product which basically takes the subjectivity in your mind out of.
It's scientific. It's essentially a bridge MRI that would allow them to empirically and objectively
We'll talk about it.
look at bridges. Other states are using
But ultimately, I think the big thing is here is that you guys that the Trucking Association of Rhode Island doubts the efficacy of this inspection that led to this closure because there's no restrictions and because
the suspicion was there. The 610 issue just confirmed what my suspicion is.
Okay, it's 12:20. We'll come back. We'll take some calls eventually as well. Chris Maxwell, Rhode Island Trucking Association's in studio. We'll talk more about it when we come back next.
Matt Allen,
The boss, the CEO of the Rhode Island Trucking Association, is in studio. We're going to talk to Peter Vanderzee after the bottom of the hour from Lifespan Technologies. It's somebody that Chris suggested we speak to while he was here on the air in studio about bridge inspections. They have technology that takes the human human error out of bridge inspections, because basically the Rhode Island Trucking Association is saying that the Rhode Island DOT and the governor's administration wanted to fast track this 610 connector thing for various reasons, and therefore used the subjective nature of bridge inspections to get this thing, to pull the trigger on this thing. And your evidence of that is that you talk about how dangerous the 610 connector is, specifically this Huntington Avenue or whatever it's called bridge, but there's no restrictions for heavy trucks. That's what you say.
Correct.
Now the question becomes: this is going to be fast tracked. The work is going to start supposedly next summer or next spring.
I think next spring the design process and the environmental impact would be taking place, prepping it
right
leading up to spring.
Well, they want to get the design and everything out to bid by the end of the year.
Yes.
But they want to start the project. I think what I read in the papers,
spring.
The next spring. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, what is the plan for the gantries at that point? I would imagine at that point since we have, I guess, tacit approval. Do we have tacit approval? I have no idea. Do we have approval for this gantry system to work and to go up? I mean, these bridges would have to be gantried,
right?
So told to start paying for this whole thing.
From what we understand, there are two. I heard that there were going to be as many as 9 gantries in the 610 area, and I think that may hold true once this whole plan starts to develop and other spans begin to be addressed. But the way we understand it now, and I believe these are from the comments from Director Alviti, there will be 2 in the 610 area, probably specifically at the 610 area. And I imagine that those would be affixed to in this case, the Huntington Avenue Bridge, right, or vicinities near that, and they would begin tolling, as is the original plan, begin tolling at those points, and those monies would go into that bridge, and eventually, once that bridge is repaired, those monies continue to be flowing over to other places. And we hope that those places, we hope there's no tolls. But as we said, it was shown in the New York case of the Erie Canal, any bridges any tolls or fuel tax for that money should be directed toward critical infrastructure, not parkways and bike paths and tunnels and green space.
Well, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anyway.
No,
right.
Correct.
So
correct.
Specifically through this plan, for all intents and purposes, as far as we know, subject to a legal challenge, which you guys said you would do as soon as the first one went up.
Correct. Maybe.
Maybe?
It may not be when the first one's up. It may be a series of gantries that have to go up to prove the harm and the impact.
Okay, you have to be impacted before you can file a lawsuit.
So we may wait for the whole plan to take root, and then we don't know at this point. This is such a moving target. You really don't know. This is on the top of the list. I'll be in D.C. Tuesday. This is the priority right now for the American Trucking Associations. They have a legal team. They have experts in every facet of transportation, whether it be state laws, whether it be funding.
And what's important for people to know is those guys, they are not this is not a taxpayer group. You guys are a trucking association.
Oh, yeah.
So your priority is your organization, is your members.
Correct.
It's not to protect the taxpayers.
Our priority,
if it was in your interest to win this, to let the whole damn thing be built first, waste all that money,
Look.
and then have them everywhere. It doesn't matter. So this is not going to be so that the taxpayers have to watch out for themselves.
I
Look
love
at-
Rhode Island.
Yeah.
ETA doesn't care about Rhode Island. They're going to make
Right.
an example of Rhode Island. We are in the crosshairs of the most powerful industry in the nation.
All right,
It's
we're going
not
to talk.
good.
We're going to talk more about it. Peter Vanderzee from Lifespan Technologies will join us when we come back. Right now, I'm a very cynical guy when it comes to government, but there are even some things I think just human decency in general would not allow to have happen. But but you can't take the politics out of politics, right? So, Chris, when you come in and you say that you think that the bridge inspection process is subjective and therefore subject to be manipulated in order to
drive an agenda.
to drive a political agenda, there's even I kind of go, wow, you really think that? Even I say, really?
You know,
Listen, anything's possible, but I mean, that's a hell of an accusation. The governor has not spoken out as a result. You guys questioned yesterday on Dan's shows. Listen to Dan York yesterday, 3 o'clock. You and Mike Collins are on there saying, if this bridge is so bad, the 610 connector is so bad that we have to move this, fast track it, go past all the public process and everything else, why are we still allowing heavy trucks to travel over it? And it's the fact that it hasn't been restricted is what makes you suspicious that this whole thing is just about getting this project moving.
Let me give you a quote from Anthony Fox, Secretary of Transportation.
Yes.
He said, states get federal money and spend it as they wish with little federal oversight. That's telling from the sitting Department of Transportation head.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks to the fact that there is complete discretion and subjectivity by an agency
Mm-hmm.
within a state and a political leadership to drive an agenda with very little oversight on how they do it. That's from the sitting Secretary of Transportation. I think
Well, how you spend the money is one thing, but to tell the state that the bridge is falling down when it's really not.
Well, we spent the money on. Well, we drove it the other way for years. We said that the bridges were fine to drive a surface agenda. Now we flip flopped it because I'm not saying that the bridges on the 610 are not deplorable. I'm not saying that they need attention. That's been in the dialogue for years. My contention is that I don't think they're vastly different than 14 months ago when they cried fire in the theater to promote roadworks and got it passed. I don't think there's any vast difference now. If there was, then they'd be nailing signs up right now. This is the governor using scare tactics then, using them now, and it's inappropriate from the leader of a state.
All right, so Peter Vanderzee is a gentleman that's on the line right now, and he's from the company's called Lifespan Technologies.
Right.
Peter, welcome to WPRO. How are you?
Great, Matt. How are you?
Good, thank you. Now, it's for all disclosure here. I mean, I did not call you. Chris Maxwell said, you should talk to this guy. And you have, I mean, you're with this company that sells this technology, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so everybody knows where we stand here. I mean, the technology you're talking about would help mitigate what Chris is talking about, which is that subjectivity in bridge inspections, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, so
correct,
tell us about what is the technology and what does it do?
Well, it's a combination of sensors, highly accurate sensors, the wireless communication system, and the Internet. It's also called sometimes the Internet of Things. We're able to get actual performance data from the bridges and collect that data and then use it for analysis to determine the condition of a bridge.
In terms of its safety, in terms of what the weight that can be handled, what does this stuff tell us?
All of the above.
Okay.
Okay, you can determine an overall health of the bridge, or you can determine safe weight limits. Any number of things that can be done with the data, and it's much more accurate and objective than visual inspection.
Where is this which makes sense? I mean, listen, you're a human being. You got to look at. I'm sure there's standards of degradation and there's visual cues. And we saw what was when the bridge that was near here in Rhode Island, the Speaker of the House had that bridge near his office shut down.
Yeah.
They show pictures of the different the underneath. There was a bunch of wood supports there that were rotting away, and you could see them. So I'm sure that there's visual standards that are always going to be. If there's a human being doing them, it's going to be open to interpretation.
Right. I don't want to steal Peter's.
Absolutely true. And in 2001, 15 years ago, the Federal Highway Administration published a report that said their own visual inspection process was subjective and highly variable. So we've been using that report for 15 years to explain to people why this technology is much more effective.
So you guys do what? You go around and is this part of a temporary thing where you install this technology for a couple of weeks, get some readings, get some ideas, and then interpret the data, or is this something that is a part of the general infrastructure of the bridge at all times?
No, not generally part of the infrastructure. What we'll do, we typically team up with an engineering firm and the state DOT, and we'll put a monitoring system on the bridge, and it will be there for several months, could be several years even. And when there's sufficient data available, the engineering firm will do the analysis and then provide a report to the state DOT.
Have you ever had conflicting information where you come into a place that's a bridge is deemed either worse or better than after your technology has been installed and actually gotten to the quote unquote truth or the more fact-based data?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at minimum, I would say half of the structures we look at are in better to much better condition than visual inspection indicates.
Really?
Yes.
And do you find that is there more well, I guess better would be in general, it would depend, right? I mean, what's better? You still have a set of criteria that you're using. Is the criteria agreed upon by the parties that, this is what is considered a good bridge? That's federal regulation, I would imagine, right?
Well, there's good engineering that has to go on. I right. would tell you that nobody's taking any chances as a result of this analysis. Right. But they're using real data, and that's completely different than a visual inspection regime. Okay, and when you use real data and you actually can plug numbers into a formula to determine proper weight limits or determine the overall load-carrying capacity of a bridge or its overall health or whatever, then you come up with a very objective set of recommendations. And when these engineering companies put these reports out and say, you know what, that bridge is a lot better than you think it is, I mean, their reputation's on the line. They take some liability by putting that report in front of the customer.
Has this been employed in states around the region at all or anywhere around here yet?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've been all over the country, actually, from Colorado and California and Indiana, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Last year we did a project for New York State Thruway. They were going to post a bridge that leads into the Mass Pike, and we used our technology there and proved to them they didn't need to post it.
So more often than not, you would find, would you say in your experience that your technology tells people that the bridge is better than people think it is?
Yes.
It tends towards that?
Yes, it does.
So,
and that's to be expected, because the bridge inspectors today across the country are trained to be conservative. And that is okay,
which is a good
as long
thing.
As you have a lot of money to throw around.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's as somebody who travels bridges and drives over them on a regular basis, I appreciate them being conservative when it comes to that. Right. I don't want anything falling down on my watch. I got my kid in the car, so I can say it's an interesting thing because you'd think that people who are bridge inspectors and that bridge inspections is just one of those things that it's just everybody agrees on. And it's just, this is the way it's done. This is the way, and everybody has standards that they're all like, oh yeah, that's got to go. Because at the end of the day, do you ever want to be the guy that has a bridge fall down on your watch or somebody?
Well, and that's the reason that it's overly conservative and subjective, is because if two men are out there looking at a bridge, and one of them says, I think that component should be rated 5, and the other one says 4, 4 goes down on the report, not 5.
Right.
Okay, but
you never want to be the guy that says
data, we're finding 4 or 5 becomes a 6 or a 7.
Chris, so in your mind, you hear about this, and this is in your bailiwick now because of what's going on in Rhode Island. You guys have to care about not only the process of bridge construction, but also not only because you're going to be paying for it, you're invested, right? I mean, as a result of road works.
We have a vested interest. They want our money to do this, and if we allow an unbridled subjective process to drive this, to fix bridges that may be prematurely on the radar, then that's not right. But the bigger picture is that from weight restrictions to the whole national program, if we're going to spend billions of dollars, whether it's the truckers' money or the taxpayers' money, I think we need to move toward a more scientific, empirical, objective system, overall. And that should start in Rhode Island, because Rhode Island obviously is the poster child and the worst example of bridges. So they say. That if Peter came in, that may be a different story.
Well, it's interesting. So, just so people are just tuning in, Chris Maxwell of Rhode Island Trucking Association is in the studio. On the phone, we have Peter Vanderzee from Lifespan Technologies. Peter, is there any chance that I could broker a situation where Lifespan Technologies would come in and do a free analysis of the 610 connector for us? As a trade-off, as like a test subject to maybe get some extra business out of it.
Matt, we have plenty of work
free
all
samples?
over the country. I don't need to work for free.
All right, I was just trying to say, if we could do this.
I don't mind you asking, but Matt, I got to tell you, I was in Rhode Island DOT 5 years ago and spoke to the commissioner and the chief engineer. And they're nice people. They asked
who are no longer here, they're no longer here, by the way. Either one.
And they didn't want to act.
Right.
They didn't want to. So they weren't interested in the technology.
Not like they didn't understand it.
Interesting. Well, what do you say about that, right? Other than that, interesting. All right, Peter, thank you very much for calling in and for giving us a different perspective. If you change your mind on that freebie, let me know.
Okay, will do.
All right, Peter Vanderzee, ladies and gentlemen, from Lifespan Technology. So, Chris, that's
the technology's right? there, and it does lead you to wonder why we would not, in a state that is under duress, why we would not employ this type of technology. Maybe it's cost, absolutely.
Thing, sure.
It could be, but we're also talking about inevitably the government needs to move toward this direction at some point. Expense is probably a factor, but protecting the ability to maintain a subjective process may also be the driving force here.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk more to Chris Maxwell. Let's start taking your phone. You got time for me?
Absolutely.
All right, Chris Maxwell from the Rhode Island Trucking Association. I'd love to hear a reaction from the governor's office on this. We haven't gotten any reaction from the governor's office, as far as I know, regarding the trucking association's concern about the safety of those bridges and why there's no restrictions if that bridge is really as bad, or that 610 connector area is as bad as they say it is. I think that's an important thing, and I think the Trucking Association with Chris Maxwell at the helm here has made. To me, is a very powerful allegation in terms, or at least in you call it an allegation. I guess it's an allegation. It's an allegation that there's been a form of manipulation here to get this project underway and get it done faster, and to bypass the public process and the public commentary about what should be done here. I think it's a very serious thing to say that the chief public safety person, the governor in the state of Rhode Island, would be using through an administration, through bridge inspections, fear of damage to push an agenda.
But also within the parameters that they're allowed. Like Peter just said,
yeah.
If it's a 4 and it can become a 5, or a 5 becomes a 4.
But you're saying it's done intentionally.
Well, I think to drive an agenda, I think right, that may be the case.
Hold it right there. We're going to take a break. We'll come back, and we'll talk more about it next. All right, we got a couple minutes at the top of the hour. Chris Maxwell's in the studio. Chris is going to stay with me till the next hour. Until we can get some phone calls in as well. Because if you want to comment on what we've been talking about for the past hour, call me, 438-WPRO. The toll-free number is 1-800-321-WPRO. We'll get you lined up for the next hour. You can talk to Chris. You can talk to me. Chris Maxwell, Rhode Island Trucking Association's in studio. The battle against roadworks rages on. The governor the other day comes out, says that the 610 connector, specifically one bridge specifically, has got to be moved to the top of the list. They're fast tracking the whole thing because it's getting dangerous. Chris Maxwell and the Rhode Island truckers say, "Oh, really? If it's so dangerous, why are there no restrictions?" Correct. And so your supposition here is, Chris, that there's been, they took an inspection, they made it look worse than it is, that they made the deterioration look worse than it is, or possibly look worse than it is, be over-conservative.
Over-conservative, as Mr. Vanderzee said.
In order to, and what he's talking about is, we just had a gentleman by the name of Mr. Vanderzee, Peter Vanderzee, from an organization that sells technology that will actually inspect bridges with data rather than with human eyes.
Correct.
So, because this is a kind of thing that can happen across the country. Correct. And if you can get more use out of a bridge and not pay for new ones because it's better than you think it is, it saves you money.
Right. But if you're using other people's money,
what does it matter anyway, right? So it's interesting. This is part of the war, man. This is part of the war. All right, we come back. We'll talk to more about this with Chris, and we'll talk to you. 438-WPRO. Toll-free number is 1-800-321-WPRO.
It's a combination of sensors, highly accurate sensors, the wireless communication system, and the Internet. It's also called sometimes the Internet of Things, we're able to get actual performance data from the bridges and collect that data and then use it for analysis to determine the condition of a bridge.
That voice you hear there is a gentleman by the name of Peter Vanderzee from Lifespan Technologies. Just joined us, and in studio with me is Chris Maxwell from the Rhode Island Trucking Association. And to be honest with you, this is what I'm not trying to ever be dishonest with you. That guy was you suggested that I talk to the guy because you're talking about the argument in your mind when it comes to the 610 connector situation is there's a subjective nature to human beings visually inspecting a bridge, which is the way things are done now versus they have technology. This organization sells their technology and uses their technology to go around and to collect actual data from the physical structure of the bridge to determine whether or not the bridge is safe.
I didn't. It confirmed a long-standing suspicion I had as somebody that came from construction and saw that they basically could control the program. Neglect bridges that they were inspecting, and then in favor of surface work, and then flip-flop now to another situation where now the bridges are flip-flop to a deplorable condition.
And to bolster your point, not that I'm not trying to be your agent here, but just to bolster your point, I mean, you had a situation where when the governor took over, she brought in Peter Alviti,
correct,
new Department of Rhode Island Department of Transportation director, and immediately began inspecting bridges.
Correct.
Bridges that, for all intents and purposes, had always been rated, I guess, okay, or to a certain degree okay, whatever it was. Now we're like, oh my God, they started to ring the alarm, basically saying that, and the governor came out and said that RIDOT was basically not run well until she came in.
Correct.
Michael Lewis, the former director, she's like, good luck to you, and she praised him as he left.
Yeah.
But has said that she even put some of the head engineers and whatnot, the major folks over there on leave.
Correct.
A lot of them come back, and I think they were all retired and left at this point.
Right. They were out on leave with pay.
Right, because there was supposedly something going on that we don't know what that was because it's a personnel issue. She admitted that the place was a disaster. That Rhode Island DOT was a disaster.
Yep.
And we have, for a long time, neglected roads and bridges. People can see that. I mean, we have literally bridges right up the road here being held up by Lincoln Logs. So there's no denying that. Rhode Island Trucking Association is not saying that we do not have horrible roads and bridges, right?
We are not saying that, and we are completely on board, invested in the repair of the bridges. In fact, we, as an industry, through the roadworks debate, you seldom hear an industry open up their wallet and say, we'll fund this with $12 to $15 million a year in fuel tax increases and diesel tax increases. No, we recognize this infrastructure critical issue where it is critical. We recognize it more than anybody because we are obviously the roads are our offices. We are responsible for the supply chain, and whether it's a safety issue or an access issue, it is one of the most important issues that we face as an industry. Now, again, this goes back to Washington. The original sin is that Washington is not fixing the infrastructure issue. Washington refuses to address it with a national gas tax increase. It's politically toxic. In a similar fashion, the governor did not want to do the same. Similarly to why you wouldn't want to toll the population of cars, you don't want to do the same, right? Not intentionally. Right. That will come, but similarly speaking, you don't want to raise gas tax and impact everybody. But essentially, a toll is a tax. It's a veiled tax on our supply chain, and as we said all along, if you didn't have the political will to raise gas tax, but you put it into a truck toll, which essentially, if the trucks can't divert around the state, right, which most will, the billion-dollar carriers that have no business here will go right around the state. The local carriers that can divert off the roads to do the deliveries will, and those that can't will just pass it along. So everything everything you eat and drink and babies, diapers, everything's going to get whacked. Right. And what further exacerbates that is, much like New York, some of the ports in New York that are now ghost towns because they impose tolls, and now they've just moved out of there. Much like there's basically a national freight index, and trucking companies can choose their freight. And if Rhode Island becomes a no-fly zone, then there's a supply and demand issue where less trucks will come here, less trucks will choose the loads.
Mm-hmm.
Those that do will charge an exorbitant amount of money, and essentially our whole supply chain increases. So it is a tax.
We've talked about this a lot, but specifically, today, I mean, you guys came out last night, listening to Dan York's show. You and Mike Collins on Dan York's show last night, saying that basically that if the bridge is that bad, why are there no restrictions on it? Why are there no weight restrictions or truck restrictions on the 610 connector network of bridges?
Right.
So
we have postings. We have postings all over the state.
We remember when it was the Pawtucket River Bridge there.
Correct.
Was a disaster.
Right.
State troopers were whacking people couple thousand dollars
after they went over the bridge.
Well, you got to get your piece.
Right.
But the fact of the matter was there was a restriction there. You weren't allowed to drive over it because it was that bad.
That is correct. And that's what expedited that process.
So in your mind, that denotes to you that there is an intentional manipulation of the inspection process that is severely degraded on paper.
Within a flawed, they're exercising their discretion and their subjectivity within a flawed system that allows them to do that. It goes back to what Peter Vanderzee said. If a 5 becomes a 4 or a 3, you know what?
Who's the most strict inspector we have? Tommy Smith. Send Tommy Smith out to the 610 connector to go get a really conservative view of what's happened.
Yeah.
And they'll look at that thing and go, wow, it's really gotten worse than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
And now that since it's been that bad, we need to push this whole situation up.
Correct.
Now the governor hasn't responded to this. You as an organization have come out and said, if it's that bad, don't you think we should have a situation where trucks are not allowed to go on it? And since you've asked that question publicly on Dan's show yesterday, there's been no response from the governor's office at all, right?
We demand an answer as an industry, nationally and locally. We deserve at least that. The governor has not even acknowledged our industry directly, other than we're getting a free ride, we're protecting our bottom line. At this point, she has no choice but to directly address our question as to the viability of the bridges to sustain the heaviest trucks running around the country, which are local trucks operating legally with a Rhode Island issued overweight permit at 104,000 and 76,000 pounds. Very heavy, exponentially heavier than the trucks that they're targeting on the interstate that are only running 50, 60,000 on 70 feet and a longer wheelbase. So we demand an answer, and we may go as far as demand some empirical, objective evidence as to the viability of these bridges before we back off.
I tried to get a freebie last hour. It didn't work.
Yeah, I know. nice attempt. I'll work on them too. Yeah.
Jay's in East Providence. Jay, you're on WPRO with Matt Allen and Chris Maxwell from the Rhode Island Trucking Association.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Hey, Jay.
You should, when you do contact the governor's office, you should ask them about the rest areas that all these truckers have to use.
Yeah.
Because we were coming back from Foxwoods the other day, and we stopped into the first rest area right over the border from Connecticut.
Yep.
And it was, disgusting.
Yeah.
You could smell the outhouses from, 20 feet away, and we opened the doors. We have a full video on my Facebook page, and it's like it was overflowing with feces and everything else. And that's what these guys have to use.
Yeah.
It was absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, we're putting up the state is exploring a welcome station which will not be suitable for trucks. At the very same time, they've opened up I guess near exit 2, the former welcome station, and I guess they originally had porta-johns out there to expedite the opening. They'll eventually have They'll eventually have full working bathrooms and vending machines and parking space. We would hope to have a little more accommodation for trucking. We do have a nice facility up on exit 5 in West Greenwich, Truck Stops of America. We have a potential of a Love's truck stop going down in Hopkinton. Those are both proposed. Both of those facilities, the Truck Stops of America that employs some 60 people, pays some $8 million, I think, in taxes, and really a really great community partner in West Greenwich. They are certainly walking on ice with this, because if this does come to fruition, you're going to have virtually slashed truck traffic.
Your thesis is that the diversion rate is going to be way more than the state has ever, in any way in their calculations, has ever accounted for. And
right.
that one of the major parts of this whole roadworks thing that's going to fail is that they're not going to collect as much toll money as they think they are.
Well, they're not going to.
Projected.
have through several through the state's own gas taxes. We did an analysis that showed about realistically 2,800. Let's say, for argument's sake, to be less conservative, 3,000 trucks a day. And realistically, to back in the numbers, it looks like they need to justify the $46 million a year. They would need about 9,000 trucks a day. So there's about what we estimate is about a $35 million shortfall. But what will happen with the shortfall? And that's before diversion. That's before diversion. That's before diversion. Okay, that's just based on current traffic counts and backing in the fuel tax, and if the numbers.
And what's the diversion rate in your opinion?
Well, owner-operators, OIDA, a national agency that represents millions of owner-operators, they estimated at 76,000, 76%. Could be
76%.
They're on record. They did a survey and they said 76%. We're not a corridor state. The trucks that don't have to.
People don't know what we're talking about. Diversion is that we're not going through Rhode Island. There's tolls. We're going this way.
Go right up.
Money.
Look, and they're going to go up right up 395 to 90 to get to the same place. You've got whether they do it out of economic necessity or company policy or to punish the state. The truck traffic through the state is going to vastly disintegrate. So it's going to become a problem, and that's why we extrapolate this whole thing out. The shortfalls eventually cause them to pull in now the class in 6 and 7s that they pulled out, and eventually smaller trucks, and then eventually down to cars, because now you have the infrastructure, you can't sustain it, you didn't look at the numbers.
Gantries, we paid for all this stuff to be up there, and now we're not getting the amount of money we need to pay back the revenue bonds, and so now we need more revenue.
And that's a national conversation that has to be had. How are we going to fund infrastructure? If the federal government is not going to do its job, and they're going to, and one thing I will say, Rhode Island, was boxed into a corner. They got, for whatever reasons, and we know, there are certain reasons why there's an agenda there, but the federal issue has caused states to take matters into their own hands, and that's why
that's where we are right now.
That's where we are right now.
All right, Chris Maxwell from Rhode Island Trucking Association's in studio. We got some calls when we get to when we come back. Our phone number is 438-WPRO. The toll-free number is 1-800-321-WPRO. The truckers are saying that they should put restrictions on the 610 connector for heavy trucks if it's really that bad, to fast-track the roadworks repair. And basically what the truckers are saying is that they think that it's really not that bad. It's just that this is all part of the agenda. We'll talk.